The officer taps twice on your window, and once you've wound it down, he leans in and says the 4 words that change the whole texture of the stop. "Step out for me, please. We're going to do a drug test." And in the next few seconds, most drivers make one of 2 mistakes that can turn a routine stop into an arrest, a night in a cell, and a criminal record for something they may not have even done. Get this wrong, and you can end up disqualified from driving, fined, or prosecuted, even when the test itself was never lawfully justified in the first place. So today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what that request really means, what the officer actually needs before they're allowed to say it to you, the wrong way almost everyone responds, and the precise calm words that protect you, whether you're stone cold sober or you've simply taken your normal prescription medication that morning. Stay with me to the end, because there's a difference between a driver who does the test and gets straight back on the road, and a driver who does the exact same test and ends up in the back of a police car, and it has almost nothing to do with guilt. I'm James Hartwell. For 15 years, I defended people in police stations and courtrooms across England and Wales, and I've sat across the table from more than one person who failed a roadside drug test, not because they'd taken anything illegal, but because they panicked, they talked too much, or they simply didn't know they were allowed to ask a single simple question before they ever got out of the car. This isn't legal advice, it's the plain English version of what I wish every driver understood before that torch ever came up to their window. And let me say clearly, before we go further, that this isn't about beating a drug test if you've genuinely been driving impaired. That's not what this channel is for, and driving under the influence of drugs puts real people at real risk. This is for the enormous number of ordinary law-abiding drivers who get swept into this exact situation with nothing more in their system than their asthma inhaler, their prescribed sleeping tablets, or a coffee and a long day, and who don't know where the line actually sits. So let's start with what that request is actually built on, because this is the part almost nobody understands. When an officer asks you to step out of the car for a drug test, there are really 2 different things they might be talking about, and the difference matters enormously. The first is what's called a field impairment test, which is the officer asking you to do a short series of physical and observational tasks at the roadside, things like standing on one leg, walking in a straight line and turning, following a pen with your eyes, or estimating 30 seconds in your head. The second is the roadside drug swab, sometimes called a drug wipe, where an officer takes a small device and swabs the inside of your cheek to test your saliva for the presence of specific drugs, most commonly cannabis and cocaine. Both of these are what the law treats as preliminary tests, and here's the crucial part. An officer cannot simply decide to run either of these on a whim because they fancy checking. Under road traffic law in England and Wales, to lawfully require you to take a preliminary drug test, an officer generally needs a reasonable suspicion that you've been driving or attempting to drive with a drug in your body, or that you're under the influence of a drug to an extent that impairs your ability to drive properly. That suspicion has to come from something. A genuine smell, visibly erratic driving, glazed or pinned eyes, slurred speech, or something a witness has told them. But, and this is the part that trips up even sensible, careful people, there are 2 situations where the officer does not need any suspicion at all before they can require the test. If you've been involved in an accident, or if you've committed a moving traffic offence, the requirement to suspicion largely falls away, and the test can be required almost automatically as part of dealing with that offence or that accident. So somebody who's just had a minor bump or been pulled over for drifting over a white line can be asked to do a preliminary test with the officer needing very little beyond the fact that the incident or the offence happened. This is exactly why the casual, confident way that "step out, we're doing a drug test" gets delivered works so well on drivers. It sounds like a formality, like something that simply happens as standard procedure at every stop, when in a huge number of ordinary encounters, it is in fact conditional on the officer having a genuine reason, and that reason is something you are entitled to hear. Now here's the trap underneath the trap, and it's worth sitting with for a moment. The officer phrasing it as an instruction rather than an explanation is doing real psychological work. "Step out, we're doing a drug test" sounds final, sounds procedural, sounds like something you simply comply with, the way you'd comply with "put your seatbelt on." It doesn't sound like something you're allowed to ask a question about. And because most drivers have absolutely no idea that reasonable suspicion is even a requirement here, they never think to ask what's prompted it. They just get out. And in the anxious silence that follows, plenty of people start talking. They start explaining their week, apologizing for looking tired, mentioning the paracetamol they took, the antihistamine, the hay fever tablets, the sleeping pill from the night before, none of which the officer asked about, all of which is now sitting on his body-worn camera as a voluntary statement he can use later if anything comes back positive. So let's talk about the wrong response, because I've watched this exact scene play out more times than I can count. The nervous version of this driver gets out of the car, and because the silence feels unbearable, they start narrating their own defense before anyone's accused them of anything. I've had 2 beers, but that was hours ago. I'm on medication for my back. I probably shouldn't be driving, really. I smoked a bit of weed at the weekend, but nothing since. Every single one of those sentences is a voluntary confession to something the officer might never have had grounds to ask about, handed over for free, on camera, before the test has even started. And there's an equal and opposite mistake. The driver who's heard somewhere that you don't have to do anything the police ask, and who folds their arms and simply refuses the test outright, on principle, without asking a single question first. If the officer genuinely does have reasonable grounds, or you were in an accident, or you've committed a moving offence, refusing that lawful preliminary test without a reasonable excuse is in itself a separate criminal offence, and it's often treated every bit as seriously as if you'd failed the test itself. So outright refusal, done blindly, can turn an innocent driver into a criminal defendant for the wrong reason entirely. Here is the calm, simple alternative. And I want you to learn this the way you'd learn your own phone number, because it does an enormous amount of work in one breath. I'm happy to cooperate, officer. What's given you the suspicion for this test? And whatever it shows, am I under arrest or free to go? That's the whole thing. Say it slowly, say it politely, and notice what each part is doing. I'm happy to cooperate sets the tone immediately. It tells the officer and the camera that you are not obstructing anything, which matters enormously if this ever needs to be looked at afterwards. What's given you the suspicion for this test is the question that quietly separates a lawful requirement from a fishing expedition. If they genuinely smelled cannabis, if you were driving erratically, if there's been an accident, they can simply tell you, and once they have, you comply without a fuss. But if there's no real answer, if it's simply routine curiosity dressed up as procedure, you've made that visible, calmly, out loud, on their own camera. And the final part, whatever it shows, am I under arrest or free to go, forces the whole situation into the open rather than leaving you standing on the roadside in a fog of uncertainty about what happens next. Let me say this clearly, because it genuinely matters. Asking that question does not delay the test, and it is not obstruction. You can ask it while you're already stepping out of the car. You are not required to stand and argue about it, and you should not. If the officer confirms there's a proper basis, whether that's suspicion or an accident or an offence, you do the test. You stand on one leg if they ask you to. You let them swab your cheek if that's what they're doing. None of this is the moment to make a stand, because physically resisting a lawful preliminary test is not bravery, it's an offence, and it does nothing but make your situation dramatically worse. The entire value of that one sentence is that it costs you nothing if the test is lawful, and it quietly protects you if it wasn't. Now let me walk you through what happens if the officer pushes back, because sometimes they do, and it's worth knowing what that sounds like so it doesn't rattle you. Some officers, faced with the question, will simply and matter-of-factly tell you the reason. I could smell cannabis when I spoke to you, or you were weaving across both lanes back there. And at that point, you say thank you for telling me, and you do the test without further comment. Other officers, especially if they were relying on you not asking, might get slightly short with you. Something like, it's just standard procedure, everyone gets asked. That's the moment to stay perfectly calm and simply repeat the substance of your question gently. That's fine, I'm happy to do it. I just wondered specifically what prompted it today. You are not arguing, you are not refusing, you are simply asking once more, evenly, without raising your voice. If they still won't give you a specific reason and there's been no accident and no traffic offence, you can politely note for the record that you're complying without there being a stated reason, and you do the test anyway because remember, refusing is the one move that turns you from a cooperative, protected driver into someone facing a genuine separate charge. Your protection here isn't in refusing on the roadside. It's in the calm question that's now sitting on video, ready to be looked at properly afterwards if the result or the stop itself ever needs to be challenged. Here's the secondary point that catches out more innocent people than almost anything else in this entire situation, and it's about prescription medication. A huge number of perfectly legal, perfectly ordinary medicines, certain sleeping tablets, some strong prescribed painkillers, and a handful of other common prescriptions contain substances that can trigger a positive result on a roadside drug swab, even though you're taking them exactly as prescribed and you are not remotely impaired. If this applies to you, the moment to mention it calmly is right there at the roadside, briefly and factually. I'm on prescribed medication, and I have my prescription if you need to see it. You are not obliged to list every tablet you take or explain your entire medical history, and you shouldn't. But naming the fact that you're on a specific prescription and having some proof of that available, whether it's the box, a pharmacy label, or a note on your phone, matters enormously if the test comes back positive later. There is a recognized medical defense in law for people who are taking specified controlled drugs in accordance with a genuine prescription. But that defense works far better when you've mentioned it calmly at the roadside rather than raising it for the first time weeks later in front of a solicitor. Keep that proof somewhere easy to reach, your glove box, your phone, your wallet. Because in this exact scenario, 30 seconds of preparation before you ever get stopped can be the difference between a 5-minute conversation and a genuinely stressful few months. I also want to gently push back on the instinct some of you will have to over-explain your medical situation the moment the torch comes up. There's a version of this that goes too far the other way, where a nervous driver, desperate to be believed, launches into their entire medical history, their diagnosis, their dosage, their doctor's name, all of it, unprompted, before anyone's even asked. You don't need to do that, and you shouldn't. State the fact plainly, offer the proof if you have it, and then let the process happen. Over-explaining doesn't make you more believable. It just gives the officer more material to note down, and none of it changes what the test itself will show. Let me bring this together into what it actually looks like in real life, because hearing it as one calm moment is worth more than any list of rules. Blue lights, you pull over, window down. Evening, I need you to step out for me. We're doing a drug test. You, warmly, no hesitation in your voice. That's absolutely fine. Can I just ask what's given you the suspicion today? Nothing dramatic. You were just a little slow pulling away back there, and I want to rule it out. Ah, fair enough. Thanks for explaining. You step out, you do exactly what's asked of you, the standing, the walking, the swab, whatever it is. Partway through, if it feels relevant, you mention it plainly. Just so you know, I'm on prescribed medication. I've got the box in the car if you need to see it. Noted, thanks for telling me. The test finishes. All clear, sorry to hold you up. No problem at all, officer. You drive on. Notice what that was. No confrontation anywhere in it. No refusing. No arguing, no volunteering your entire life story either. Just a driver who knew there was a question worth asking, asked it once, calmly, complied fully with everything genuinely required, and mentioned the one fact that actually mattered at exactly the right moment. Now picture the version that goes wrong, because I've seen this one just as often. Same stop, same request. The driver, flustered, immediately starts talking. I haven't taken anything, I swear. Well, I mean, I had a paracetamol earlier, and I didn't really sleep much last night, if that matters. Is that going to be a problem? None of that was asked for. None of it was necessary. And every word of it is now on record, available to be picked apart later, regardless of what the test itself actually shows. Because a nervous, over-explaining driver reads very differently on camera to a calm one, even when they've both done absolutely nothing wrong. Before I bring this home, a quick honest note, because I always want to be straight with you about this. This is general legal education for England and Wales, not legal advice for your specific situation, and I'm not your solicitor. Drug driving law involves specific limits for specific substances and genuine medical and legal complexity. So if you're ever actually charged with anything arising from a roadside test, the very first thing you do is get proper advice from a qualified solicitor before you say another word about it to anyone. So let's bring the whole thing together, because underneath all the detail, it really is simple. When an officer says step out, we're doing a drug test. Understand what's actually happening. In most ordinary stops, they generally need a genuine reason, a reasonable suspicion, or an accident, or a moving traffic offence, before they can lawfully require it of you. You are allowed to ask, calmly and without any attitude at all, what's given them the suspicion, and whatever the result, whether you're under arrest or free to go. You do not refuse the test itself if there's a genuine basis, because refusing a lawful test is its own offence and it protects nobody. You do not over-explain, and you do not narrate your entire evening or your entire medicine cabinet to fill an awkward silence. If you're on genuine prescribed medication, you state that fact plainly, once, with proof close at hand, and then you let the process do its job. That combination, calm cooperation with the parts that are genuinely required, and quiet restraint with everything that isn't, is what separates the driver who's back on the road in 5 minutes from the one who spends the evening in a police station over nothing at all. And this is exactly the kind of moment, along with the traffic stop, the doorstep, the stop and search on the pavement, that I've put into one short, plain English guide to your rights in any police encounter in England and Wales. It's called the Know Your Rights Handbook, and it lays out, calmly and without the jargon, precisely the situations we cover on this channel, at the roadside, at your door, on foot, and yes, in exactly this scenario with a roadside drug test. I'm not going to give you a hard sell on it. If this video's been useful to you, the link is in the description, and it's there whenever you want it. If this helped you, do 2 things for me. Send it to anyone you know who drives regularly, because this is precisely the kind of thing that's far more useful learned calmly in advance than remembered in a panic at the roadside. And subscribe, because I break down exactly this kind of thing every single week, in plain English, so that the next time it's you standing there with blue lights behind you, you already know exactly what to say before the officers even finish the sentence. I'm James Hartwell. Stay calm, know your rights, and I'll see you in the next one.